Families don't fall apart in earthquakes. They drift apart like continents, an inch at a time, over years of small, ordinary moments. The jolt comes later when a phone rings and you realize how far the shore has moved. Linda Walker was measuring out morning by the quiet things: the kettle's soft rattle on the stove, the tick of the kitchen clock her husband once called stubborn, the sigh her old Cape Cod made when the heater clicked on. It had been 6 months since the last bell rang on her teaching career, and still her body woke at 5:30, as if 30 years of hall duty and spelling tests had tunneled into her bones. She liked to pretend she didn't miss it, that she didn't miss the chorus of MS Walker, but the truth was a different animal. Emptiness has a sound you can hear if you stop long enough, a hollowing echo where purpose used to sit. On the refrigerator, a child's drawing held by a magnet showed a stick figure woman with long hair and a blue dress. In wobbly letters, Nana Linda. Her granddaughter Daisy had made it after a weekend visit last spring, the weekend that smelled like cinnamon rolls and sidewalk chalk. Linda touched the paper the way some people touch a cross, a reflex shaped by hope. The phone rang at 7:04. Her heart lifted before her hand did. "Emily," she said, "because you can tell your own child's silence from anyone else's." The clipped breath, the impatience dressed up as speed. "Mom," Emily answered, no hello, no how are you, just a word that felt suddenly less like a title and more like a clearing of the throat. "Mom, I need you to babysit for 2 weeks. You don't have a job anymore, right?" In another house, in another story, there might have been a laugh to soften it. In this one, there was a pause long enough to hear the tea leaves surrender to the water. Linda rested her forearm on the counter. She could picture Emily perfectly. Hair scraped into a high bun, phone in one hand, blazer half on, the other hand corralling a toddler's sneaker. Hustle lived in her daughter the way patience had lived in Linda, the inheritance of a different era. When Emily was small, Linda had promised herself she wouldn't be the kind of mother who made love conditional on proximity. But promises are easier to keep when no one tests them. 2 weeks, Linda repeated, because repetition buys you time when your heart is learning a new rhythm. That's soon. I know, Emily said, and Linda could hear a door slam somewhere, the car chime scolding. "I have this launch in New York. It's a whole thing. Investors, panels, brand stuff you wouldn't anyway. Dan's on a job site upstate and the sitter quit. It's just 2 weeks. You like being with the kids." Like, didn't touch it. The first time she held Daisy, the world turned small and enormous at the same time. The first time she kissed little Max's hair, she remembered the exact smell of Emily as a baby and nearly drowned in it. But love and logistics are cousins who barely speak. Linda said carefully, "I have the doctor on Tuesday at 10 and the car." "Mom." The word was sharper this time, the impatience pulled tight as a violin string. "You don't have a job anymore. You always say you want more time with Daisy and Max. Here it is." Linda swallowed. Not working had felt less like stopping and more like being stopped, like a train that ran out of track in the dark. People at church had called it well-deserved. Facebook had called it congratulations. The Mirror had called it, "Who are you now?" "It's not that I don't want to help," Linda said, and the kettle began to keen as if translating her into steam. "It's just the house, it's not baby-proofed anymore, and the stairs. We'll bring the gates, the pack and play, it's fine." Emily's voice softened by a single degree like a thermostat nudge you barely feel. "Mom, please, this is important for me, for us." The us caught Linda and set her gently down. Once, us had meant a cardboard kitchen table with a second-hand checkered cloth. A mother drawing stars on homework papers while her daughter colored beside her. It meant lunches packed with napkin notes. "You are my sunshine, Mom," and Friday night Disney movies, and jeans with the knees patched because new ones weren't in the budget. It meant a family drawn tight against the world, not always pretty, not always easy, but close enough to share breath. "Okay," Linda said softly. She felt something tip inside her like a chair yielding a rung and righted it with practice. "Okay, 2 weeks. You're a lifesaver," Emily said, and relief poured through the line so fast Linda could almost feel its warmth on her palm. "We'll be there tonight, around 6. Could you actually never mind? We'll figure dinner." "Of course," Linda said, because that is what you say when your child asks for your time and tucks no please into the fold. "Drive carefully." The line went dead with a beep that sounded a lot like period, not exclamation point. Linda set the phone down and turned off the kettle. The house exhaled again. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing, because sometimes that's all there is to bark at. She poured the hot water anyway, watched it take the shape of the mug. 2 weeks. She looked at the calendar pinned to the wall. 2 weeks and then what? Calendars are brave, they mark squares as if any of us keep our appointments with hope. She ate toast standing up the way teachers do and made a list the way mothers do. Outlet covers, corner guards, snack ideas that nod to nutrition but wave at joy, apple slices with peanut butter, carrots shaped like stars if she could find the little cutter. The old wooden high chair was in the attic. She'd scrub it until it remembered it was loved. She wrote "Call Dr. Feldman" to reschedule and underlined it, because at 50 you start adding later to things that used to be now, and the list is where you keep your virtue. In the spare room, she stripped the bed and smoothed fresh sheets, the crisp white ones she saved for guests. She found the box of picture books no one asked for and stacked them by height. Good night, moon, the snowy day. Last stop on Market Street. She vacuumed as if the carpet might reveal a past self in its lines. The day lengthened into afternoon, sunlight moving across the hallway like slow applause. She thought of the last day in her classroom. The principal had brought a cake with buttercream roses the color of band-aids. Children hugged her waist and left confetti fingerprints on her dress. Parents took photos. Someone played My Wish on a Bluetooth speaker. In the faculty room later, someone joked about sleeping in, about beaches and books. She had smiled. Her smile sat correctly on her face, but she was an old hand at showing up. It took her months to realize she was mourning not the job, but the daily proof she mattered. At 5:48, a text, traffic. 6:15? At 6:32, a new one, make it 7. Daisy's meltdown. At 7 on the dot, headlight beam slid across Linda's living room, long and white as unpinned seams. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door before her daughter knocked. Emily swept in like a weather front. There was that clean, expensive smell Linda had never learned to name. Behind her, Daisy shuffled, clutching a unicorn backpack that had seen things, and Max slept lopsided in his car seat, mouth open, the solemn surrender of babies at day's end. Hey, Emily said, one-armed hug already loosening as she scanned the room. Thanks again, you're a saint. Gates in the trunk, Dan will bring the stroller tomorrow. Come in, sweetheart, Linda said. I made mac and cheese, real cheese, broccoli on the side so it can be negotiated. Daisy's eyes flicked up. Is it the trees kind or the small leaves kind? The little leaves, Linda said, conspiratorial. The trees are for people with superpowers. Daisy considered and nodded, the tribunal satisfied. They ate at the kitchen table, where years ago Emily learned to read, by sounding out cereal boxes. Max woke weepy and Linda held him anyway, bounced gently, hummed the song you hum when you have nothing left but tenderness. After bath time, quick, so the skin kept its baby smell, Linda tucked Daisy into the spare room under a quilt her own mother had stitched from old dresses. Daisy asked for a story. Linda told one about a fox who built a library in the woods. All the animals came not for the books, but for the way the place made them feel less alone. You can tell good stories, Daisy said, eyes sliding shut. I had practice, Linda whispered to the dark. In the hall, Emily rubbed her temple with the heel of her hand. Okay, so schedule. Daisy's preschool drop-off is 8:30, pickup is noon. Max does better if he naps by 10. Screen time, try to keep it to an hour, but if you need more, whatever. I'll Venmo you for groceries. We'll be back in, well, flights are funny, 2 Sundays from now. Okay, Linda said, because she meant it. Because she would bend her days like willow branches if it meant her granddaughter would eat, nap, and avoid the harder weather. Emily's gaze landed on the drawing on the fridge. Cute, she said. Then, as if remembering something, Mom, you're not still doing that thing where you save every little paper, right? It's clutter. Linda's thumb pressed the magnet, feeling the drag of the metal, the way small things resist. I tidy when I can, she said. Emily looked at her watch. I should go. Early flight, you'll be fine, you're great with them. It came out like an item checked, not a blessing offered. They hugged in the doorway, the kind of embrace you give when your head is already in tomorrow. Love you, Emily said, and it was sincere, the way busy love often is, true but hurried. Love you too, Linda answered. Hers was the old kind, unhurried, even when her heart tapped its foot. When the car pulled away, the house shifted again. Daisy breathed a small wheeze in the spare room. Max burbled in his sleep. The kitchen hummed with the aftersound of family, a shell ringing faintly with the sea once it's been lifted away. Linda washed the dishes by hand because warm water has a way of smoothing a day's edges. She dried the counter until it shone back a version of the room, and then, because there was no one to prove anything to, she let the shine be enough. Upstairs, in the little bathroom with the gentle mirror, she paused. The glass didn't lie. It had never learned how. 50 stared back at her, not the number, but the collection. The laugh lines that remembered students' jokes. The crescent moons beneath her eyes cut by 1,000 midnights. The mouth that learned to smile even when money was low, even when grief was high. She touched her cheek, then her throat, as if taking inventory of the person she had built while no one was watching. 2 weeks, she whispered to the woman in the glass. You can do 2 weeks. The mirror didn't argue. Mirrors rarely do. But in the quiet that followed, with the house holding its breath around her, Linda heard herself say the sentence out loud for the first time, soft and ashamed and stunned by its own weight. Maybe I've really become useless. The morning after Emily left, Linda woke to the sound of Daisy's soft humming through the baby monitor. It was a nursery rhyme, half remembered and out of tune, but sweet in its persistence. The kind of sound that pulled her backward in time rather than forward into the day. She lay there for a moment, letting the ceiling fan spin its slow circles above her, and thought about how many mornings in her life had started this same way, with a small sound that needed her. For years it had been Emily's cry from the crib, then the scrape of her chair at the breakfast table, then the rustle of homework being stuffed into a backpack. Now, decades later, the cycle had returned. Another small voice, another reason to get up. In the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgled. Linda poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching steam rise like a prayer that wasn't sure who it was for. The house smelled faintly of baby lotion and cheddar crackers, a scent that belonged to love disguised as responsibility. She hadn't planned to think about the past that morning, but it arrived anyway, the way sunlight sneaks through the crack between blinds. It began with a memory she never quite escaped. The night her husband, Mark, didn't come home. It had been raining in sheets, and the phone rang just before midnight. A voice she didn't know said the words she'd been trained all her life to fear: "There's been an accident." She remembered the feeling, not the sound, how her stomach dropped as if gravity had changed its mind. Emily was 4. She'd slept through the storm. Grief in those early years was an hourly thing. Linda learned how to hide it under schedules and permission slips. She'd get Emily ready for daycare, teach 25 third graders multiplication tables, then rush to the grocery store on a teacher's salary and a widow's benefits check. Nights were for mending: the ripped knees in Emily's jeans, the leaking pipes, the cracks that showed up everywhere except on her own face. She could still see that small kitchen in their first apartment, avocado green linoleum curling at the corners, wallpaper patterned with faded pears, a single bulb that flickered when the wind hit the power line outside. There had been nights when the fridge held nothing but a jar of jelly and a half loaf of bread, and still she'd made it work. Emily would say, "This is the best dinner ever, Mommy," and Linda would smile, pretending it was true. Those were the years when she became expert at small magic. She could turn a hand-me-down dress into a costume, stretch $10 of groceries into 4 meals, spin a bedtime story out of exhaustion and faith. Her mother used to say, "Love isn't measured in what you give, it's measured in what you go without." Linda had gone without a lot. She'd skipped job promotions because they required late nights when no one could watch Emily. She'd turned down dates with kind men because she didn't want her daughter to grow up calling another man dad. She'd watched other families at church take vacations, buy new cars, move into houses with real yards, and she'd told herself our time will come. It never really did. But somehow it didn't matter. Seeing Emily graduate from college, cap slightly crooked, eyes gleaming with the same stubborn hope Mark once had been enough. That day, Linda thought the story was over. She'd done it. She'd built something out of nothing. But success has a strange way of rearranging love. When Emily got her first job in marketing, Linda was proud. When Emily moved to Los Angeles for a bigger opportunity, Linda said she was thrilled, even though she cried in the parking lot of the U-Haul storage facility after helping her pack. And when Emily stopped calling every Sunday, Linda told herself that was what independence looked like. Now, years later, hearing "you don't have a job anymore, right?" had stripped all that justification bare. Independence had turned into distance. Gratitude had dissolved into assumption. She looked over at Daisy, now sitting at the table with her cereal, swinging her legs. The little girl grinned, milk on her chin. "Grandma, can I have more of the Circle cereal? The ones with sugar?" "Of course, sweetheart." Linda smiled. "But let's call it a treat, not breakfast." Daisy giggled. "Mom says sugar makes me creative." "Your mom says a lot of things," Linda murmured, pouring just a small handful into the bowl. Max began fussing from the portable crib in the living room. Linda scooped him up, bouncing gently until his head settled on her shoulder. He smelled like the life she once lived: baby shampoo, drool, and the faintest hint of peanut butter. She closed her eyes and breathed him in. That afternoon, while the kids napped, Linda wandered into her spare bedroom, her so-called storage room. Boxes lined the wall: Emily's baby clothes, Mark's things, old lesson plans. She knelt and opened one labeled Winter 998. Inside were photos: Emily in a thrift store snowsuit, grinning with missing teeth, Linda holding her up, cheeks red from the cold. They were smiling like they owned the world, because for one brief afternoon, maybe they did. She turned over a picture of Mark. He was standing by the half-finished porch of their old house, hammer in hand, looking up at the camera like he could see the future and it wasn't half bad. "You'd know what to say," she whispered. "You always did." The phone buzzed, another text from Emily. "Forgot to mention Daisy has ballet practice Friday. Don't let her skip. Also, Max needs almond milk, not cow milk. Remember, he's sensitive. Thanks. No, how are you, Mom? No, love you. Just instructions." Efficient, distant. Linda stared at the message until the screen dimmed. She set the phone down and sat in silence, listening to the house tick. For the first time, she wondered whether love could survive modernization, whether hearts, like appliances, had an expiration date. That night, after the kids were asleep, Linda poured herself a small glass of wine and sat at the dining table. The silence around her wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that came after years of noise, when even quiet felt like work. She took a notebook from the drawer and began to write. Not a journal, not exactly. More like a map of how she got here. She wrote about the accident, the long nights, the way she'd learned to fix the washing machine with duct tape because calling a repairman cost too much. She wrote about Emily's first day of school, when she'd pretended to be brave while her daughter clung to her leg. She wrote about the smell of chalk on her hands after decades of teaching, and how she'd believed that being useful was the same as being loved. The pen moved faster as she wrote the words she'd never said out loud. I gave everything I had, and somehow it wasn't enough to make her stay kind. Tears blurred the ink. She closed the notebook. The room seemed smaller than it had in the morning, as if memory had weight. Then, through the baby monitor, she heard Daisy whispering in her sleep. "Grandma, don't go." Linda wiped her face and smiled through it. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart," she whispered to the monitor to the house to her younger self. When she went to bed that night, she dreamed of her classroom. The chalkboard, the rows of desks, the tiny hands raised high. Only this time, Emily was there too, a child again, sitting in the front row, looking up at her mother as if she still believed every lesson Linda ever taught. And for a moment, before the dream faded, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, that what she'd done, what she'd endured, still mattered. Outside, the wind brushed the trees. Inside, the old teacher slept beside the ghosts of her own sacrifices, unaware that by morning, her quiet life would begin to stir with a new kind of storm, one that wouldn't just test her patience, but her heart. The next morning began with a spill, apple juice across the kitchen floor, a sticky amber tide creeping toward the rug. Daisy stood frozen, her hands cupped in apology. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I know, honey." Linda knelt, wiping up the mess with a dish towel. "Accidents happen." She said it softly, but her heart was beating harder than it should have been. Lately, everything felt fragile: the glass, the quiet, her own patience. Raising children had been easier when she was younger, maybe because then she still believed in unlimited tomorrows. By the time she had both kids dressed and fed, the sun was higher and her phone was buzzing again. Another text from Emily. "Don't forget Daisy's ballet class today. Make sure her hair's in a tight bun. Not a ponytail, it looks sloppy on camera." Linda stared at the words. On camera? Then she remembered Emily had mentioned her mom vlog, a weekly online series about balancing career and motherhood. Linda had never watched it, partly out of discomfort, partly because she didn't know how. But that phrase, on camera, stuck in her mind all morning like a piece of grit behind the eye. After lunch, while Max napped, Linda opened her laptop. It took her 3 tries to find the right website, 3 more to figure out the search bar. But when she typed Emily Walker Modern Motherhood, dozens of glossy thumbnails appeared. Emily in designer clothes, Emily with perfect lighting, Emily laughing beside her children in coordinated outfits. Linda clicked one. "Hi, loves." Emily's voice filled the room, bright and polished. "Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about intentional living, how I stay productive as a mom, wife, and business owner. You just need the right mindset, the right system, and the right support." Behind her, a pristine kitchen gleamed. The kids were in matching pajamas. The counters sparkled. It didn't look like any house Linda had ever known. Then, near the end of the video, Emily said it. "I'm so lucky to have a mom who helps out sometimes. She's traditional. She means well, but she's not used to this new lifestyle. You know, career moms, digital age parenting. She still thinks kids should be bored sometimes, but we all evolve, right?" She laughed, as if kindness excused the cruelty. The comment section below was full of hearts and praise. "You're such an inspiration. Love how honest you are about generational gaps." Linda closed the laptop. The reflection of her own face lingered for a moment on the dark screen. She didn't recognize it. That afternoon, Daisy pirouetted around the living room, practicing for ballet. "Mom says I have to smile all the time, even when my toes hurt," she said proudly. "Does that make dancing fun?" Linda asked. Daisy shrugged. "Mom says smiling makes people like you." "Maybe," Linda said quietly. "But sometimes being real makes people love you." Daisy didn't understand, but that was all right. Some lessons are meant to grow slowly, like roots under snow. Later that day, Emily called. The sound of city traffic bled through the phone. "Hey, Mom, how are the kids?" "They're fine," Linda said. "Daisy's practicing. Max is down for a nap." "Good, I'll FaceTime them tomorrow. Maybe film a quick clip if they're clean and the background's nice. Could you make sure they wear the pastel sweaters? They photograph better." Emily: "What?" "I watched your channel." A pause. "Oh, I didn't realize I was part of your show." "It's not a show, Mom, it's my job." Emily's tone carried that blend of defensiveness and pride that only success can create. "People relate to authenticity. Sharing my journey helps other moms feel less alone." "Does authenticity include making me sound like a museum piece?" "Mom, please, don't take it personally. It's content." Linda felt the words settle like stones in her chest. It's content. Somewhere between generations, love had become material. "I didn't raise you to treat people like content," she said softly. "I know, Mom." Emily sighed, exasperated. "You raised me to survive, and I am. Look, this is how the world works now. You either evolve or you disappear." Linda wanted to say, some things aren't meant to evolve. Some things are meant to endure, but before she could, Emily's voice brightened suddenly, signaling the conversation's end. "Anyway, I've got a call with my agent. Kiss the kids for me. And remember tight bun, pastel sweaters. Bye." The line clicked off. That night, while folding Daisy's tiny leotards, Linda thought about evolution. Her daughter was right in a way. The world had changed. But somewhere in all that progress, it seemed to have misplaced its soul. In her classroom years ago, Linda used to tell her students, "You can't measure worth in trophies or likes or perfect grades. You measure it in kindness." They'd nodded politely, the way children do when something sounds too simple to be true. Now she wondered if even adults had stopped believing it. When the kids were asleep, she went out to the porch. The night was warm, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and faraway rain. Across the street, the neighbor's teenage son was filming a video on his phone, shouting into the glow of a ring light. His laughter echoed down the block. The world was loud now, so loud that people mistook noise for meaning. Linda looked up at the stars, faint through the city haze. She thought about Emily's smile in those videos, too wide, too practiced, and wondered when her daughter had learned to trade joy for image. She remembered the girl who once sat on her lap in that same porch swing asking, "Mommy, do you think I'll be famous someday?" Linda had said, "You'll be loved, that's even better." Maybe she'd been wrong, or maybe the world had simply changed the dictionary on her. The next morning, Daisy refused breakfast. "I'm not supposed to eat before ballet. Mom says it makes my stomach look big in the pictures." Linda felt her throat tighten. "Honey, you need food to dance, to think, to grow." "But Mom's on a cleanse," Daisy said matter-of-factly. "We're matching." Linda crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, your mom's grown-up body is different from yours. You need pancakes." Daisy hesitated, then grinned. "With syrup?" "With syrup." They made pancakes together, the kitchen filling with the warm smell of butter and laughter. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused, just a grandmother and her granddaughter, sharing something simple and human. But later, when Emily called again and saw syrup on Daisy's face through the video chat, her tone sharpened. "Mom, I told you, no heavy food before class. You can't just do things your way anymore." Linda almost said, "I've been doing things my way for 50 years, and it's kept you alive," but she didn't. She just smiled and said, "We'll manage." That night, after tucking the children in, Linda stood by the window, watching headlights pass. In the reflection, she saw her own face next to a younger version of it, Emily's, on a magazine cover that had come in the mail months ago. The modern mother, how Emily Walker built a life on her own terms. Linda traced the photo's edge with her thumb. She wasn't jealous, only bewildered. Somewhere between survival and success, her daughter had built a world she no longer recognized. And yet, under all that disappointment, love still pulsed steady as a heartbeat. She whispered to the quiet house, "She'll come back to herself, she has to." But deep down, she wasn't sure who herself was anymore, Emily or the woman who had raised her. In the morning, she would get up again, make coffee, tie Daisy's hair in a perfect bun, and keep pretending everything was fine. Because that's what mothers do. They hold the cracks together, even when no one remembers what broke them. The next few days blurred into a rhythm that only grandmothers seem to understand, a mixture of quiet endurance and endless small tasks that never quite stay done. Morning cereal spills, mismatched socks, tears over the wrong color cup. In between all that noise, Linda found flashes of stillness, moments when the world seemed to exhale, and she could almost believe everything was okay. But the house didn't sound the same as it used to. Laughter had changed its accent. Daisy and Max were different from the children Linda had once known. Not bad, just built by another generation's rules. They were bright and beautiful and impatient. They moved through life like it was something to be consumed, not lived. One afternoon, while Daisy watched her tablet at the table, Linda leaned over. "Sweetheart, what are you watching?" "It's Mommy's vlog," Daisy said proudly. "She says I'm her brand's core inspiration." Linda smiled carefully. "That's nice, honey. What does that mean?" Daisy shrugged, eyes glued to the screen. "It means people like to see me smile." "And what do you like?" Daisy hesitated. "When Mommy says I did good." Linda nodded, though her chest tightened. "You always do good, baby." Max toddled in, his toy car clutched in one hand. "Grandma, can I have the Wi-Fi password?" "The what?" "The Wi-Fi. Mommy says if I can't watch my shows, I'll get bored energy." Linda stifled a laugh. "Bored energy? I think that's called imagination." He frowned. "Mommy says boredom's bad." Linda crouched down until her eyes met his. "No, Max, boredom can be magic. It's how you learn to make something out of nothing." He stared at her blankly. "Can I still have the Wi-Fi?" She sighed, smiling despite herself. After lunch. It was strange, she thought, how childhood had changed. When Emily was their age, she'd played with sticks and invented stories about knights and dragons in the backyard. Now, stories came prepackaged in videos and branded merchandise. Linda tried to hold her judgment back. Every generation swore the next one was lost. Still, something about it all ached. These children, so connected to the world and yet so distant from the people right in front of them. That evening after dinner, Daisy asked, "Grandma, why don't you live in a big house like Mommy?" Linda looked up from the sink. "Well, I like this house. It's cozy, it's home. But Mommy says you could have had more if you'd worked harder." Linda froze, dish towel in hand. "She said that?" Daisy nodded innocently. "She said you were always tired. That's why she had to be different." It wasn't malice, just a child repeating what she'd heard. Still, the words landed like pebbles on wet soil, sinking deep. Linda dried her hands and knelt beside her granddaughter. "Sweetheart, your mom worked very hard, and I'm proud of her." But being tired isn't the same as being weak. Sometimes we get tired because we give everything we have. Daisy frowned. Like when you let me finish the last cookie? Linda chuckled softly. Exactly like that. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, she sat alone in the living room. The toys scattered across the rug looked almost like offerings, tiny plastic sacrifices to the gods of busyness. She thought about how Emily had once begged for attention the same way Daisy now begged for Wi-Fi. Maybe the need hadn't changed at all, just the language it spoke. Her phone buzzed, another text from Emily. Post the kids' bedtime photo tonight if you can. It keeps engagement up. Hashtag grandma love, it performs well. Linda stared at the message, reading it 3 times before setting the phone down. Engagement up, performing well? Those were marketing words, not family words. For a moment, she wanted to throw the phone across the room. But she didn't. Instead, she took a picture of the dark living room, the small nightlight glowing in the corner, 2 tiny pairs of shoes by the door, the soft quiet of a home at rest. She didn't post it. She just looked at it for a long time, letting the stillness remind her what love looked like before hashtags existed. The next morning brought a storm. Rain hammered the windows as thunder rumbled like an argument somewhere far away. Daisy woke up grumpy, Max refused breakfast, and by 10 o'clock, Linda's nerves were frayed. She finally turned off the TV and said, "We're having a screen-free day." Both children froze. Daisy's spoon dropped with a clatter. What? No tablet, no Wi-Fi, no shows. We're going to make something instead. What if we don't want to? Max said. Then you'll be bored, Linda replied, and that's perfectly fine. For a while, they sulked, but boredom has its own quiet alchemy. By noon, Daisy was drawing on the window fog with her finger, crooked hearts and stick figures. Max was building towers out of cereal boxes. When one fell, he laughed, really laughed, not the kind copied from cartoons. See, Linda said, that's imagination. Daisy looked up, smiling. It's kind of fun. It always was. For a few hours, the house felt like it used to, the kind of place where love wasn't scheduled, just found. But the peace didn't last. Evening, Emily called from a hotel room, her voice sharp. Mom, what happened to the photo post? I told you it was important. I didn't think the children needed to be on display every night, Linda said calmly. It's not about display, it's storytelling, it's how I build my brand. Linda closed her eyes. Emily, they're children, not content. A pause. You always twist everything. You never supported me, not even now. That's not true. Yes, it is. You think because you worked yourself half to death that it makes you a saint. But guess what, Mom? The world changed. You just stayed behind. The silence after that stretched long and cold. Finally, Linda said, maybe, but love doesn't expire with time, Emily. It just waits for you to notice it again. Emily scoffed. Save the Hallmark lines for your students, Mom. The call ended. Linda stood there, phone still warm in her hand, listening to the soft rain outside. She didn't cry, not yet, she just whispered, I was never trying to be a saint, I was just trying to be your mother. The next morning, when Daisy padded into the kitchen in her bunny slippers, she asked, Grandma, are you sad? Linda forced a smile. No, honey, just thinking. Mom says thinking too much makes people old. Linda laughed, a short, genuine sound. Then I must be ancient. She poured them both orange juice, this time steady-handed. Outside, the storm clouds were beginning to break, and sunlight spilled across the counter. Daisy leaned her head on Linda's arm. Max hummed softly to himself, dragging his toy car across the table. And for a fleeting second, Linda felt it again, that small, defiant warmth that had carried her through decades of loss and love. Maybe the world had changed, but she hadn't forgotten how to hold it together. Even if no one noticed, she still did what mothers have always done. She stayed. The week moved in slow, uneven steps, long days that began with cereal and ended with exhaustion. By the fifth morning, Linda had found her rhythm again, or at least something that looked like rhythm. Oatmeal for breakfast, school drop-off, laundry folded in neat piles, nap times that offered a few minutes of peace. But beneath that surface calm, something restless stirred. It wasn't just the fatigue of motherhood revisited, it was a quiet ache, sense that something in Emily's world didn't add up. It started with the envelopes. On Tuesday afternoon, a courier dropped off a stack of mail addressed to Emily. Linda almost left it untouched, but the top envelope bore the return address of a law firm, Wright and Latham Family Law Specialists. The second one came from a private bank, both marked confidential. She shouldn't have looked, she knew that, but motherhood often blurs the line between curiosity and survival. Inside the first envelope, a letter began. Dear MS Walker, as per your request, we've attached the preliminary divorce settlement draft. Please review and return your notes by Friday. Linda froze. Divorce? She sank into a chair, the paper trembling in her hands. David, Emily's husband, had been mentioned only briefly in their calls, as if he were a supporting actor in a play that no longer needed him. But divorce? That wasn't just absence, that was rupture. She read the letter again, slower this time, as if a second reading might change the words. It didn't. The second envelope held something worse, a wire transfer slip, $5,000 to an account under a name Linda didn't recognize. The memo line read, consultation fee NYC relocation. Relocation? Her breath caught, so that was it. Emily wasn't just away on business, she was planning to leave. She felt sick. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think. The world seemed to tilt around her, the kitchen too bright, too quiet. She's leaving them. It wasn't possible. Emily adored her children, at least that's what she showed the camera. But the woman in those videos had become harder to recognize, even for her own mother. Linda folded the papers and placed them back in the envelopes, setting them neatly on the counter, as though tidiness could make the truth less sharp. She told herself she wouldn't say anything, not yet. Not until she was sure. But the confirmation came sooner than she expected. That night, while tucking Daisy in, the little girl whispered, "Mommy says we might move soon." Linda's heart thudded. "Move where, sweetheart?" "Somewhere with big buildings and lots of lights. She says Daddy won't come because he's too boring." Linda swallowed hard. "Did Mommy say that?" Daisy nodded, then yawned. "But I don't want to move. I like my school." Linda stroked her hair, her hand trembling slightly. "Don't worry, love, you're safe here." Daisy's breathing deepened. Linda sat in the dark for a long while, listening to the soft rhythm of sleep and the slow unraveling of her certainty. The next morning, she called David. He sounded surprised and tired. "Linda, everything okay with the kids?" "They're fine," she said carefully. "David, I need to ask you something. Is Emily planning to move?" Silence, then a sigh. "You found out, so it's true?" "Yeah." His voice cracked slightly. "She told me last month. Said she got an offer in New York, something about expanding her brand, starting fresh. She said it would be better for everyone if we took a break." Linda pressed the phone tighter. "And the kids?" "She said she'd take them once she's settled." Linda stood, staring at the backyard, at the small swing set David had built last summer, still swaying in the wind. "Does she plan to come back at all?" "I don't know anymore," he said quietly. "I thought maybe it was just talk, but then she stopped answering my calls. I didn't want to drag you into it, Linda, not while you were helping." "Drag me into it?" she said softly. "David, these are my grandchildren. I'm already in it." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, I should have told you." "It's not you who should be sorry," Linda said and hung up before the tears came. That evening, Emily called again, bright, distracted, and perfectly polished. "Hey, Mom, how are my babies?" "They're fine," Linda said, voice steady. "We missed your call last night." "Yeah, meetings ran late, you know how it is." "I know what it is to work hard," Linda said evenly, "but I also know what it looks like when someone starts running from themselves." A pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I got some mail for you from Wright and Latham." Silence, then, "You opened my mail?" "I did," Linda said, "because I'm your mother, and because I'm taking care of your children while you're preparing to disappear." "That's not fair, Mom." "No," Linda said, voice trembling but strong. "What's not fair is two little kids thinking their mother's just on a trip when she's planning to leave their father and maybe them too. Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" Linda almost laughed. "Emily, you're sending money to another man in New York. What do you call that?" "You don't understand." "You're right, I don't." Her tone softened, almost pleading. "Help me then, make me understand." But Emily's answer came sharp as glass. "You don't get to judge me. You don't know what it's like to want more out of life. You gave up everything and look where it got you, alone, small, forgotten." Linda flinched as if struck. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Emily sighed. "I'll pick up the kids this weekend. We'll talk then." "Will you?" "Yes, Mom, don't worry. It's just time for a change." Then she hung up. Linda sat there, phone pressed to her heart, the words echoing, alone, small, forgotten. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe she was small. But she was also steady, and she'd spent 50 years learning that sometimes the smallest things, a kept promise, a safe home, a hand on a child's back, were the ones that saved people. She wiped her tears and went to check on the kids. Daisy had kicked off her blanket. Max was curled around his stuffed bear. Linda stood in the doorway, whispering to no one in particular, "I won't let her hurt you, not like this." The next morning, she called her old friend Nora, who still worked at the local courthouse. "I need some advice," she said, "about custody, hypothetically." Nora's voice softened. "Linda, what's going on?" "Just tell me what I need to know," Linda said quietly. By the time she hung up, she had a list of steps, documents, witnesses, proof of neglect. It made her stomach twist, but she knew what had to be done. That night, she opened her notebook again. But this time, she didn't write memories. She wrote strategy. At the top of the page, in her steady teacher's handwriting, she wrote one sentence. "If Emily won't protect her children, I will." And when she closed the book, her heart no longer felt soft and uncertain, it felt forged. The morning after that long, sleepless night, Linda woke with a kind of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The house was still, the kind of quiet that happens before dawn when the world hasn't yet remembered its noise. She stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, and whispered to herself, "It's time." Outside, the first light stretched across the yard, touching the old oak tree that had shaded Emily's childhood swing. That swing had once been a symbol of love, of innocence. Now, it felt like a silent witness to all that had gone wrong. Linda sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her worn notebook, the same one she'd used to track lesson plans back when she still taught middle school English. This time, her lesson was survival. She drew 3 columns. Column 1, what I know. Column 2, what I can prove. Column 3, what I can do. Under the first, she wrote, "Emily is planning to move to New York. Divorce papers have been drafted. The children don't know the truth. Money is being transferred to another account. Under the second, letters and transfer slips, text messages from Emily, Daisy's confession about the move, and under the third, talk to a family lawyer. Gather witnesses, David, Nora. Keep the children safe until everything is clear. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote, but her mind was sharp, the way it used to be when she was guiding a classroom of restless students through Shakespeare. Only this time, the tragedy wasn't written by a playwright. It was unfolding in her own living room. By mid-morning, she called David. David, it's Linda. I think we need to meet. He arrived an hour later, still in his work uniform, oil-stained, weary-eyed, smelling faintly of diesel. When he stepped inside, he looked older than his years. "Where are the kids?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "In the backyard, playing," Linda said, "for now." He sat across from her at the kitchen table, and she pushed the envelopes toward him, the ones she'd found days ago. His face drained of color as he read. "She's really doing it." Linda nodded, "and I think she's planning to take the kids with her." He clenched his jaw. "Over my dead body." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Linda said softly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain began to patter lightly against the window, the sound filling the space between them. Finally, David said, "What do you want me to do?" "You need to call a lawyer today," Linda said firmly. "I already talked to Nora. She says if Emily's trying to relocate without your consent, you can file for temporary custody, but we'll need evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Neglect, manipulation, anything that proves she's unfit to take the kids right now." David ran a hand through his hair. "Linda, she's their mother. I don't want to destroy her." Linda's voice trembled. "And she's my daughter, but I'll destroy her plans if that's what it takes to save those children." That evening, when the kids were in bed, Linda started recording. Not the kind of recording Emily made, not the glossy, edited, relatable kind, but the real kind. She sat at her dining table, facing an old voice recorder David had brought from work. "My name is Linda Walker," she began, her voice calm but steady. "This is for legal documentation. I am currently the temporary guardian of my grandchildren, Daisy and Max Walker. Their mother, Emily Walker, is preparing to leave the state without notifying their father or securing custody arrangements. I believe the children's safety is at risk." Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. "I raised Emily alone after her father died. I taught her to be strong, to fight for what's right. Somewhere along the way, she forgot what those words meant. I won't let her forget again, not at the cost of her children." When she finished, she turned off the recorder, exhaled, and for a brief moment, her eyes filled with tears. Not from fear, from grief. Because every time a mother protects her child, some part of her heart must die a little in the process. The next day, the kids were restless. Daisy had sensed the tension in the air. "Grandma, why are you sad?" she asked as they colored at the table. "I'm not sad," Linda said gently, "just thinking." "About Mommy?" Linda nodded. "About how much she loves you and how sometimes love gets a little lost." Daisy frowned, pressing her crayon harder into the paper. "Then we should find it." Linda smiled faintly. "We will." That afternoon, while the children napped, she went through Emily's social media accounts. Most of it was predictable, polished photos, motivational captions, hashtags about living your truth. But buried between posts about skincare and motherhood tips was something darker. A video posted 3 weeks ago, private but not hidden well enough. In it, Emily sat in a dimly lit hotel room, speaking to someone off camera. "Once this deal goes through, I'll be out. No more pretending, no more David, no more guilt, just freedom." The voice that answered was male, smooth, confident, and the kids? Emily's laugh was sharp. "They'll adapt, they always do, they're resilient, or at least that's what I'll tell the followers." Linda's stomach turned, her hands trembled as she paused the video. This was no longer a story about selfishness, it was a story about abandonment. She saved the file, emailed it to herself, and whispered, "You're not taking them, Emily, not this time." That night, she called Nora again. "I have proof now," Linda said, "enough to file an emergency petition if she tries anything." "Good," Nora replied. "But Linda, are you ready for what this means? You'll be going up against your own daughter." Linda looked out the window. The house across the street glowed with warm light. A family sat together at dinner, laughter faint through the glass. "I've spent my whole life protecting Emily," she said quietly. "Now I'm protecting what's left of her, her children." "Then we'll move fast," Nora said. "Keep the kids close, don't let Emily know what you've found yet." "I won't," Linda promised. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Linda sat in the dark living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. On the table before her lay the evidence, the letters, the transfer slips, the screenshots, the video file, proof that love can rot when it's mixed with ambition. She took a deep breath, folded her hands, and whispered, "Forgive me, Emily, but this time I won't stand by." Upstairs, Daisy murmured in her sleep, "Grandma." Linda looked up at the ceiling and smiled through tears. "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm right here." And for the first time in years, Linda felt something new, not hope exactly, but resolve. A steel thread of purpose winding through her heart. The storm was coming, but this time she wouldn't hide from it. She'd meet it head on, like a mother who's finally remembered she still has fight left in her. The weekend came faster than Linda expected, as if time itself had chosen sides. The days leading up to Saturday were filled with quiet tension like air just before a thunderclap. She didn't tell the children anything concrete, only that their mother would be coming home soon. But Daisy sensed something deeper. "Grandma," she asked on Friday night, her voice small, "is Mommy mad at us?" Linda tucked her in and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart, she's just confused right now." "Will she take us away?" Linda hesitated, not without saying goodbye. It wasn't a lie, not yet. Saturday morning arrived gray and windless. Linda stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal she knew no one would finish. Her reflection in the kettle looked older than she remembered. There was a new kind of strength in her face, not the easy strength of youth, but the weathered, unshakable kind that comes after years of being told to keep quiet and smile anyway. She looked out the window. The swing in the yard swayed lightly in the wind, a ghost of childhood moving by itself. At 9:00 a.m., her phone rang. "Emily?" "Hey, Mom," her daughter's voice chimed, bright and artificial. "I'm landing in an hour. Can you have the kids ready?" Linda's stomach tightened. "Of course, we'll be here." "Great. Oh, and don't feed them anything heavy. I'm taking them out for dinner tonight." Linda forced her tone steady. "Dinner?" "Yes, with a friend. Don't worry, Mom. I've got everything under control." That last line, "I've got everything under control," always meant the opposite with Emily. When the call ended, Linda exhaled. The words from Nora replayed in her mind. "If she tries to take them out of state, call immediately. We'll have a court order ready." She didn't want to believe Emily would actually try, but the evidence said otherwise. At 10:30, a black SUV rolled into the driveway. Linda's heart sank. Emily stepped out immaculate as ever, dressed in designer jeans, sunglasses, and a sharp confidence that barely hid the exhaustion beneath. Behind her, a man climbed out of the passenger seat, tall, tanned, expensive looking. "Mom," Emily said, her voice sugary. "This is Ryan, my business partner." Linda didn't move. "Business partner?" Ryan smiled and extended a hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Walker. I've heard so much about you." "I'm sure you have," Linda replied, not taking it. Daisy ran out the door before Linda could stop her. "Mommy," she cried. Emily crouched down, arms wide, gathering both children. "Oh, my babies, did you miss me?" Max clung to her leg, but Daisy hesitated. "Are we going somewhere?" Emily's eyes flickered just for a second, then she smiled. "Just dinner, sweetheart." Linda felt her pulse rise. Just dinner could mean anything. "Emily," she said carefully, "can we talk for a moment?" Inside, her daughter straightened, still smiling for the kids. "Sure, Mom, just make it quick." In the kitchen, Linda closed the door behind them. "Who is he really?" Emily's tone hardened. "Don't start. You're planning to take the kids, aren't you? I saw the documents. I know about the transfer." Her daughter's face shifted from irritation to ice. "You had no right to go through my mail." "I had every right. Those children are my flesh and blood, and I will not let you drag them into your chaos." Emily crossed her arms. "Chaos? You think you know everything, but you don't, Mom. You don't know what it's like to feel trapped, invisible, unwanted." Linda's voice broke, soft but firm. "Invisible? You were everything to me. I worked myself sick to give you a chance at the life I never had. And now you're using that chance to abandon your own children." "That's not what I'm doing." "Then tell me what you are doing." Emily's composure cracked for the briefest moment. "I'm starting over." Linda stared at her. "Without them?" "I just need time, Mom, time to figure things out. Ryan understands me. He sees me." Linda's heart ached. "He doesn't see you, Emily. He sees what he can take from you. And when he's done, you'll have nothing left, not even your children." Emily's eyes glistened, but her pride wouldn't let her break. "Never believe in me, you never did." "I believed in you so much," Linda whispered, "that I forgot to believe in myself." A knock came from the door. Ryan's voice carried through the hallway. "Everything okay?" Emily turned toward the sound. "We're fine," she called. Then she looked back at her mother, cold again. "I'm taking them for dinner, don't make a scene." Linda stepped between her and the door. "No, you're not. Move, Mom. I can't. Don't do this." "I have to." Their eyes met, mother and daughter, both trembling, both standing in the ruins of love turned to war. "Emily Walker," Linda said quietly, "if you try to take those kids anywhere, I will call the police." Emily's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't dare." Linda pulled her phone from her pocket. "Try me." For a second, Emily looked like a little girl again, scared, cornered, desperate. Then her face hardened once more. "You're insane," she spat, brushing past her. The children were waiting in the foyer, holding their jackets. "Come on, Mommy, let's go," Max said eagerly. Emily hesitated, torn between impulse and consequence. Ryan hovered by the door, uneasy now. Then, before she could reach for the doorknob, sirens sounded in the distance. She froze. Two police cars turned the corner, lights flashing blue and red against the white of the morning sky. Linda had made the call before Emily even arrived. Emily turned, disbelief and betrayal written across her face. "You set me up." Linda's voice shook. "I protected you. Even now I'm protecting you from doing something you can't take back." The officers approached the door, polite but firm. "Mrs. Walker, we received a report about a potential custody violation." Emily's voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. They're my children." "Ma'am," one officer said calmly, "you're listed in a pending custody review. You're not permitted to remove the children from the state until the matter is resolved." Emily looked at Linda, rage blazing through her tears. You destroyed me. Linda's lips trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. No, you destroyed yourself. An hour later, the SUV was gone. Emily had left with the officers to file statements. Ryan had disappeared before the police even arrived. The children sat at the kitchen table, confused, scared. Is Mommy in trouble? Daisy whispered. Linda knelt beside her. Mommy just needs help right now, the kind of help love couldn't give her anymore. Daisy's lower lip trembled. Will she come back? Yes, Linda said softly, stroking her hair. But when she does, things will be different. Max clung to her side. Grandma, I don't want to leave you. She wrapped her arms around both of them, holding them so tight it hurt. You're not going anywhere, my loves. Outside. The last of the police cars pulled away. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred, unbroken. Linda sat down, heart pounding, hands still shaking. The storm had come and gone, but the wreckage it left behind that would take time to rebuild. And as she watched the children cling to her, she understood something deeper. Sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes love means standing in the doorway and refusing to move. The house felt different after the police left, heavier somehow, as if the air itself remembered every word that had been shouted. Linda spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning without purpose, just to quiet her hands. Every sound, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the fridge, seemed too loud, like the world was trying to fill a silence that couldn't be filled. The children were unusually calm. Daisy drew quietly in the corner while Max sat on the floor with his toy cars, tracing invisible roads across the hardwood. No one asked for the TV. No one mentioned Emily. Grief has a strange way of entering a home. It doesn't knock. It just moves in and rearranges everything you thought you understood about love. Around dusk, David arrived. He looked worn, the kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep but about heartache. Where are they? He asked. In the living room, Linda said softly. They're okay. He stepped inside and saw Daisy's drawing spread across the floor. It was a family portrait, 4 figures holding hands. Himself, Daisy, Max, and Grandma Linda. Emily was nowhere to be seen. David swallowed hard. She's really gone, isn't she? Linda hesitated. For now, she'll have to face the court soon. But yes, David, she's gone. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. God, I still can't believe it. All those years I thought she was just ambitious. Turns out she was already leaving us one piece at a time. Linda sat across from him, her voice low but steady. People who chase emptiness don't realize how contagious it is until everyone around them starts feeling hollow too. They sat there for a while in the quiet, the kind that only families share after a storm, when there's nothing left to say, only the ache of survival. That night, after the kids went to bed, David asked, Do you think I failed her? Linda looked at him, seeing not the broken man in front of her but the boy he once was, the one she'd comforted through scraped knees and first heartbreaks. No, she said, you loved her. Sometimes love isn't enough to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. He nodded slowly. I used to think she was just lost. Now I think she knew exactly where she was going. She just didn't care who she left behind. Linda didn't answer. She didn't have to. In the following days, routine returned, fragile but present. The children laughed again, cautiously at first, then freely. Linda walked them to school every morning, their small hands wrapped around hers like anchors. Teachers smiled politely, not asking about Emily, though everyone in the small Ohio town had heard something. By the third day, Linda was back to making pancakes shaped like stars. When Daisy smiled up at her with syrup on her chin and said, Grandma, you make them better than Mommy, Linda nearly cried into the skillet. But nights were harder. That was when the doubts came, quiet, whispering things she didn't want to hear. You turned your daughter in. You destroyed your own blood. Was saving them worth losing her? She would sit in bed, staring at the photo of Emily as a child, pigtails, gap-toothed grin, the same light that now flickered inside Daisy. She whispered to the picture, I didn't destroy you, Emily. I just stopped letting you destroy them. On Thursday afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was Nora, her old friend from the courthouse. She stepped in, coat dusted with rain. I've got updates, she said. Linda poured 2 cups of tea, her hands trembling slightly. Tell me. The hearing's been set for next week. David's lawyer filed for emergency custody, and the judge approved temporary guardianship for both of you. Both? Yes, you and David are the legal caretakers until the court finalizes custody. It's the best possible outcome right now. Linda exhaled, relief washing through her like a tide. Thank God. Nora took a sip of tea, but there's something else. Linda looked up uneasy. Emily's hired her own attorney. She's claiming emotional coercion, says you manipulated the children against her. Linda's heart dropped. She's still fighting? She's not giving up easily, Nora said. But don't worry, we have the recordings, the letters, the financial records. The truth's on your side. The truth doesn't always win, Linda whispered. Nora reached across the table, placing her hand over Linda's. No, but people like you give it a fighting chance. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She went outside, sitting on the porch steps with a blanket around her shoulders. The air was cool and smelled like rain-soaked earth. She thought of all the roles she'd played: mother, teacher, widow, grandmother, and now, reluctant warrior. The stars above seemed faint, dimmed by the weight of clouds, but still there. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Daisy appeared in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Grandma, why are you out here? Linda smiled gently. Couldn't sleep, come sit with me. Daisy climbed into her lap. I miss mommy. I know, sweetheart. She said she'd call. She didn't. Linda brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. Sometimes people make promises they mean at the moment, but can't keep later. Do you think she still loves us? The question pierced deeper than Linda expected. She swallowed hard. Yes, she said softly. But love gets sick sometimes, like a flower that doesn't get sunlight. It's still there, it just needs time to grow back. Daisy leaned against her, small and warm and heartbreakingly innocent. Then maybe we can help her grow again. Linda closed her eyes, holding her tightly. Maybe we can, she whispered. But deep down, she knew some gardens never bloom again. Next morning, an email arrived from Emily's lawyer. Subject, custody hearing, Walker vs. Walker. The date was circled in red on Linda's calendar before she even realized she'd done it. She looked at the photo of her family on the mantel, David smiling awkwardly, the kids mid-laugh, her hand on Daisy's shoulder. Emily wasn't in it. This was the family she had now, not perfect, not whole, but real. And she would fight for it, not out of vengeance, but out of love. Because sometimes the hardest part of being a mother isn't protecting your children from the world. It's protecting them from one of your own. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and fear. The kind of sterile, echoing place where lives are quietly rearranged by people in suits who barely know the names they're deciding for. Linda sat in the second row of benches, her palms resting on her knees, the steady rhythm of her pulse loud in her ears. David sat beside her, tie crooked, fingers interlocked so tightly they were turning white. Across the aisle, Emily entered, dressed immaculately in a cream suit and pearls, her chin lifted, her expression carefully composed. But Linda saw it immediately, the tightness in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes, pride holding together what guilt had long since eroded. Their eyes met. For the briefest second, mother and daughter, two women bound by blood and broken by love, saw the reflection of everything they'd lost. Then Emily looked away. The judge entered, a tall woman with graying hair and a voice like quiet thunder. Court is now in session. We're here to address the custody hearing between David Walker and Emily Walker. Present are also the children's grandmother, Mrs. Linda Walker, who currently holds temporary guardianship. Linda's heart clenched. Temporary, a word that could mean salvation or loss. Emily's attorney stood first, a young, sharp man with slick back hair and a tone that bled confidence. Your Honor, my client is the biological mother. She's been unfairly vilified, manipulated by outside interference. He gestured toward Linda, and deserves restoration of her parental rights immediately. David's lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, rose calmly. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mrs. Walker's actions endangered the children's emotional and physical well-being, and that Mr. Walker and Mrs. Linda Walker have provided stability and care during her absence. The judge nodded. Proceed. Emily's lawyer called her to the stand first. She walked with perfect posture, every movement rehearsed. When she began to speak, her voice was soft, trembling in all the right places. I admit I made mistakes, she said, but I love my children. I went to New York for business to build something for their future. My mother and husband misunderstood. They've always wanted control. The lawyer nodded sympathetically. You're saying this wasn't abandonment, it was ambition. Yes, Emily said. I wanted to show my daughter that women don't have to choose between family and success. Linda felt her throat tighten. The words might have moved her once, before she'd seen the truth behind them. Mr. Jenkins stood. Mrs. Walker, he said, his tone patient but firm, were you aware that while you were pursuing this ambition, your husband and children had no contact with you for nearly 2 months? Emily hesitated. I was busy. Busy enough that your son started therapy for separation anxiety. Her jaw tightened. That's an exaggeration. And what about the financial records showing $30,000 in debt accumulated in your husband's name? Or the email correspondence with a man named Ryan Green? Emily's lawyer objected. Irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. Mr. Jenkins laid a folder on the table. We have bank transfers, communication logs, and a signed witness statement confirming that Mrs. Walker intended to relocate permanently with her children without informing the father. That constitutes attempted parental relocation and emotional endangerment. The courtroom was silent. Emily's composure cracked. That's not true, Mom. Tell them, you know I'd never hurt the kids. Linda's breath caught. For a split second, she saw her daughter again, not the woman driven by pride, but the little girl she used to braid hair for, the one who used to whisper, "Don't let go, Mama," when crossing the street. I know you didn't mean to, Linda said softly, voice trembling, but you did hurt them. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side, Linda whispered, just not the side that destroys you. When it was Linda's turn to take the stand, she felt the room tilt slightly, as if the air itself leaned in to listen. Mr. Jenkins guided her gently. Mrs. Walker, can you tell us what happened the day your daughter returned? Linda nodded slowly. She came to take the children. I had evidence she planned to leave the state without her husband's consent. I called the authorities before she arrived. Emily's lawyer jumped up. So you admit to deceiving your daughter to setting her up? Linda met his gaze calmly. No, I admit to protecting two children who couldn't protect themselves. Even if it meant betraying your own daughter? Linda paused, her voice breaking on the words. Being a mother means doing what's right, not what's easy. Sometimes love isn't a hug, it's a boundary. The courtroom was silent again, heavy with the weight of truth that didn't need decoration. After testimonies from the child psychologist and the CPS investigator, it was clear the tide had turned. The psychologist spoke gently but firmly. The children displayed signs of anxiety tied directly to their mother's inconsistent presence. Since living with their grandmother and father, their behavior has stabilized. They feel safe. Linda closed her eyes. The word safe hit her like a prayer finally answered. When the session ended, the judge took a long pause before speaking. This court recognizes the complexity of this case. Mrs. Emily Walker, it is clear you love your children, but love without responsibility is not protection. Until you can demonstrate consistent stability, emotional and financial, custody will remain with Mr. Walker and Mrs. Linda Walker. You will be granted supervised visitation. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Tears welled, but pride held them back. The gavel struck, custody granted. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was soft and forgiving. The air smelled faintly of rain, like the world had decided to start over. David exhaled, his shoulders shaking. It's over, he said. Linda put a hand on his arm. No, she said gently, it's beginning. They stood on the courthouse steps in silence, until they saw Daisy and Max running toward them from where Nora had been watching them. Daisy's hair flew wild in the wind, Max's small hands clutching a paper drawing. Grandma, Daddy? They shouted. They collided into Linda's arms, their warmth breaking whatever numbness was left. Mommy said you took her away, Daisy murmured, looking up at her. Linda knelt down, cupping her granddaughter's face. No, sweetheart. I just made sure everyone stayed safe until Mommy learns how to come back the right way. Daisy's eyes were full of confusion and hope. Will she come back? Linda smiled sadly. Maybe one day, people can change if they really want to. That night, after tucking the children in, Linda stood by the window, watching the rain start again. The courthouse paper lay on the table, stamped, official, unchangeable. But what mattered most wasn't in ink. It was in the quiet breaths of two children asleep upstairs. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel peace, not joy, not triumph, just the gentle exhale that comes when a storm finally passes. In her heart, she whispered to the night, I didn't win, Emily. We all lost something today, but at least your children didn't lose everything. And as the rain tapped gently against the glass, Linda finally let herself cry, not out of regret, but relief. Because the truth had spoken, and for once, love had survived the courtroom. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell quietly, as if the world wanted to cover everything that had been broken with a white, merciful blanket. The house smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent, the kind of domestic peace Linda hadn't felt in years. The children had adapted quickly, children always do. They built snowmen in the yard, drank cocoa by the fire, and filled the house with laughter that sounded almost like healing. Daisy talked about school plays, and Max had learned to write his name in crooked, proud letters. Linda moved through her days in rhythm. Wake early, make breakfast, walk the kids to school, return to her quiet kitchen where sunlight now seemed softer, less accusing. But the silence still carried echoes of arguments, of slammed doors, of a daughter she once thought she could save. She hadn't heard from Emily in over 3 months. Every Thursday, a thin envelope arrived from her lawyer, updates on the custody arrangement, reports from the supervised visits. The first time Linda opened one, her hands shook. Inside was a typed page. Visitation attended, mother punctual, no incidents. The second report was the same. The third included a note, mother expressed emotional distress. Children remained calm but distant. Linda read that line 3 times. Children remained calm but distant. It was the kind of sentence that said everything, that something had broken between mother and child, quietly, permanently. She tucked the papers into a drawer, not out of anger, out of mourning. In January, Emily called. Her voice was hesitant, brittle like glass about to crack. Hi, Mom. Linda froze, the sound of her daughter's voice slicing through the quiet. Hello, Emily. A pause. The kids, are they okay? They're fine, Linda said carefully. Daisy's in the school play next month. Max started drawing trucks on everything he owns. A small laugh escaped Emily, soft, tired. He always loved trucks. Yes, Linda said, he did. There was another long silence. Then Emily whispered, I saw them last week. Daisy wouldn't hug me. She said she didn't have time. Linda closed her eyes. She's protecting herself. It's what children do when love starts feeling dangerous. Emily's breath caught. I didn't mean for any of this, Mom. I just wanted a different life. I know, Linda said gently, but you can't build a new life by burning down the old one. On the other end, Emily began to cry, the quiet, restrained kind of crying that sounds like someone trying not to break. Do they hate me? She whispered. No, Linda said, her own throat tightening. Children don't hate, they just remember. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Emily said softly, I've started seeing a counselor. I'm trying to fix things. That's good, Linda said and meant it. It's a start. Another pause. Would you? Emily's voice faltered. Would you come with me next time? Maybe we could talk together. Linda's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. After everything, after months of silence and blame, her daughter was asking for her, not to fight, but to heal. I'll think about it, Linda said softly. Call me when you're ready. 2 weeks later, she did. The counseling office was small, warm, smelling faintly of chamomile tea and wood polish. Emily sat across from her, looking smaller than Linda remembered. Gone was the curated confidence, the designer clothes, social media smile. What remained was the raw, frightened woman beneath it all. The therapist, a calm woman in her 60s, began gently. We're not here to blame, we're here to understand. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. I didn't realize how much of my life was about proving something to you, she said quietly. All my ambition, my success, it wasn't for me. It was for the version of me I thought you wanted. Linda's heart twisted. I never wanted perfection. Emily, I just wanted you safe. But I never felt safe, Emily whispered. You were always strong, always holding everything together. I thought I had to be like that too, but I'm not you. Linda's eyes softened. No, you're not. You were never supposed to be. Emily looked up then, tears streaking her face. And now I've ruined everything. Linda shook her head. Not everything, not yet. Silence filled the room, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. Only hums with possibility. That night back home, Linda sat by the fire while snow fell outside. The children were asleep upstairs, their dreams safe for once. She thought about that session, about the small miracle of her daughter finally saying I was wrong. Healing, she realized, didn't come in grand gestures. It came in sentences whispered through tears, in small steps taken toward forgiveness instead of away from it. When the phone buzzed, it was a message from Emily. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Linda smiled through tears. Her reply was simple. That's what mothers do, Emily. We keep the light on. February came with sunlight and melting snow. Life began to move again gently. Daisy started humming while brushing her teeth. Max built a fort out of blankets in the living room. David seemed lighter too, tired but hopeful. And one Sunday afternoon, while the kids painted in the kitchen, Linda received a call from Emily. Mom, she said, her voice softer now, the court approved unsupervised visits. I was wondering if I could come by this weekend. Maybe stay for dinner? Linda hesitated, looking out the window. The yard was white and still, but the air was full of thaw. Yes, she said finally, come home. Saturday came. Emily arrived just before sunset, holding a bouquet of lilies and a trembling smile. Daisy stared at her for a moment, unsure, then whispered, Mommy? Emily knelt down. Hey, baby. Daisy ran to her. Hug was long, awkward at first, then real. Max joined, his small arms clinging tight around both of them. Emily cried openly now, whispering apologies that no one asked for but everyone needed to hear. Linda stood in the doorway, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't step in. She didn't speak. She just watched, a quiet witness to the miracle of something broken learning how to hold itself again. That night after dinner, Emily helped wash dishes. You still use the same old sponge, she said softly. Linda smiled faintly. It still works. Emily looked down. I don't deserve this, any of it. Linda handed her a towel. You don't have to deserve love, Emily. You just have to be willing to start again. They finished in silence. When Emily left later that night, she hugged her mother longer than she ever had before. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For still being my mom. After she drove away, Linda stood by the window, watching the car's headlights fade into the dark. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. Not of losing, not of failing. Because she understood now, motherhood wasn't about holding on forever. It was about holding steady long enough for your children to find their way back. The snow outside had begun to melt, revealing green underneath. Spring was coming. And this time, Linda was ready for it. By March, the snow had all but vanished. The yard that had been buried in white for months was now waking up in color, green blades pushing through damp soil, crocuses opening their shy purple faces toward the sun. Life, it seemed, had remembered how to begin again. Linda sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea, watching Daisy and Max chase each other through the yard. Their laughter rang through the soft air like wind chimes, delicate, unpredictable, joyful. Every sound of it was a reminder that peace wasn't something you stumbled upon. It was something you fought for, piece by piece, moment by moment. Inside, the table was already set for Sunday dinner. Emily had started coming over every weekend, no longer as a guest, but as a mother learning to start from scratch, one bedtime story, one apology, one patient conversation at a time. She was quieter now, more thoughtful. The sharp edges that once guarded her had softened, replaced by something that looked like humility. That evening, when the sun dipped low, painting the kitchen in honey light, Emily stood beside her mother at the stove. Smells good, she said, smiling gently. You always make it look so easy. Linda chuckled. After 50 years of practice, you learn a few things. Emily leaned against the counter, stirring the pot. Do you ever think about Dad? All the time, Linda said, her eyes distant but warm. He'd be proud of you, you know. Emily's brow furrowed. Proud. After everything? Of the trying, Linda said simply. He always believed failing isn't what breaks a person, quitting does. Emily nodded slowly, her voice soft. I almost quit on them, on you, on myself. But you didn't, Linda said. That's what matters. Dinner that night was noisy, messy, and perfect. Max spilled his juice twice, Daisy told a story that went on for 10 minutes without a point, and Emily laughed, really laughed, not the staged kind that once belonged to her camera. David joined them too. The air between him and Emily was fragile but kind. They weren't ready to rebuild what they once had, but at least they'd stopped tearing it down. After the kids went to bed, the four of them sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the spring night hum with crickets. Emily turned to her mother. I don't know if I'll ever fix everything, Mom. I'm not sure I can. Linda reached over, taking her hand. Then stop trying to fix it. Just love it as it is. Emily looked down, tears glimmering in the porch light. You always know what to say. Linda smiled. That's because I've had practice staying quiet long enough to learn what matters. They sat in silence, listening to the faint laughter of children from the upstairs window. For once, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full of forgiveness, of beginnings, of everything that could still be mended. Weeks passed, and life began to find its rhythm again. Emily started volunteering at Daisy's school, helping with art projects and bake sales. David fixed the old swing set in the backyard. Linda took up gardening again, her hands in the dirt, the way they always had been when she needed to think. One morning, while planting new roses, Emily came out with 2 cups of coffee. Mom, she said softly, I've been thinking. Oh, Linda teased, that's dangerous. Emily smiled. I want to move back, not to the city here, near you. I found a little house 2 streets over. Nothing fancy, but it feels right. Linda looked up, blinking back the sudden rush of emotion. Are you sure? I am, Emily said. I think it's time to stop running. Linda set her trowel down and stood, brushing soil from her hands. Then welcome home. They hugged there in the garden, 2 women who had once lost each other, now learning how to grow side by side. Months later, on a warm afternoon, Linda stood in the school gym, clapping proudly as Daisy took a bow on stage after her class play. Emily stood next to her, eyes wet, whispering, She's amazing. Linda smiled. So were you once. Emily laughed softly. Maybe I can be again. Linda put an arm around her. You already are. That night, as fireflies danced over the lawn, Linda wrote in her notebook one last time, the same one that had once held her fears, her plans, her evidence. There was a time I thought motherhood ended when your children grew up. I was wrong. It doesn't end, it evolves. It becomes something quieter, wiser, humbler. It becomes watching from the porch as the next generation learns that love, real love, isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up again and again, even after the storms. She closed the notebook and set it beside her tea. Inside, the house was alive with the sound of her family, imperfect, messy, whole. Linda looked up at the night sky and whispered, Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the universe, for giving her one more chance to see what forgiveness looks like when it finally takes root. To my dear readers, thank you for walking with me through Linda's story, through her sacrifices, her heartbreak, and her quiet, enduring strength. This tale was never just about motherhood. It was about love that survives mistakes, about learning that family isn't who's perfect, but who stays. Wherever you are reading this, may you hold your loved ones a little closer tonight. May you speak forgiveness before pride. And may your home, however small or imperfect, always echo with laughter after the storms. Wishing you health, peace, and a heart full of family. With love and gratitude from the storyteller to you.